So this panel is going to follow the first rule of this conference, and we're going to talk about generative AI. But we're gonna try to move the conversation forward. And so our panel is called Moving Beyond Plagiarism. And even though that's the title, we'll talk a little bit about plagiarism, and then we'll also talk about going beyond it. And we'll talk broadly about how GenAI is impacting higher education. And so my name's Saurabh Sanghvi. I'll be moderating the panel. But more importantly, I'm joined by Anant, Mark, Thais, and Tracey, who will be talking about the perspectives from 2U and edX, from National University, from Cengage, and from Vanderbilt University. And so to maybe frame the conversation, let me start with 4 broad themes. The first, as I think probably everybody has heard from this conversation, there's really an interesting moment between GenAI hype and an anxiety. And higher education, I think, is one of the interesting places where you really see both sides of it. At a conference like this, you can get really optimistic and see the hype side of it. And that's also true when you look at faculty members and if you look at data on the student use and things like that. But on the other hand, there is quite a bit of fear and anxiety. 30 to 40% of faculty members, based on several surveys that I just looked at recently and I heard quoted during the conference, highlighted that people are quite worried about the negative potential outcomes of these things. And so being able to think both about the hype but also the anxiety is going to be really important. The second is this is impacting all disciplines, right? All too often we sometimes jump to what's the future of computing or the future of computer science, or we need more STEM. But all of our research highlights that when we think about these trends, it's impacting all roles and functions. And so we need to be thinking about AI fluency not only from an engineering or computing standpoint, but also what does it mean for the liberal arts? What does it mean for philosophy? What does it mean for the sciences? And think kind of holistically about all of our disciplines. Third, there's real kind of, I always like to say that this is much more a change management problem than a tech problem. And so when we actually think about at-scale adoption, how do we get a sector, sorry everyone, that doesn't necessarily move as fast as we would like or as other parts of this conference, to scale the adoption but do it responsibly and ethically? And then the last thing are, there's so much opportunities for GenAI. Even in this conference, we've probably all been inundated by 100+ types of use cases. And what I want to encourage our panelists to really think about are, what are the priority use cases that universities and the broader ecosystem should be thinking about, and how can we get people to really emphasize and focus on those things that are going to improve student outcomes, that are going to improve teaching and learning, that are going to improve things that we all care about, and how do we do that really responsibly and ethically? And so to start that, the first theme that I want us to all cover is really this: what are the skills of the future, and how do we go about starting to teach that AI fluency that I was talking about, but not just kind of in the computing and engineering perspective, but throughout that. And so, Tracey, let me start maybe with you. From your perspective at Vanderbilt University, how are you all thinking about what skills are going to be critical to teach in this new world? And how are you doing that not just for the engineering and computing schools, but also for all of the disciplines that you all teach at Vanderbilt?
So thanks. So first and foremost, we have to ensure we're meeting our principal responsibility of those foundational skills that every learner needs to be effective, right? The foundational skills that ensure that they can learn, that they can adapt agilely, effectively to the world today and the world tomorrow. So those foundational skills include things like critical thinking, analytical reasoning, creative problem solving. And if we think about those foundational skills, then we can ask for each discipline, how does AI, generative AI, contribute to your ability to teach? Let's take, for example, critical thinking. So at Vanderbilt, the law school started the Vanderbilt AI Law Lab, or VAIL, we have a fondness for acronyms, as all universities do. And they teach students how to engage with generative AI in Socratic dialogue as a way to test hypotheses and to think critically. What they're also effectively doing, right, because the students are attracted to the idea of that students want to use generative AI, but in the process they're learning how to actually engage with it as a contributor to, but not a substitute for the process of thinking critically. They have to ask the questions, they have to ask the follow-up questions, much as we do as Socratic teachers. A secondary benefit for beginning by talking with people about the foundational skills is it reminds our faculty, and I am unfortunately now amongst the senior faculty, that we have this, right? We know how to teach foundational skills. The way we teach foundational skills should adapt and grow as well, and so that they can just simply incorporate this in what they're already doing.
Mark, how are you thinking about that same question from the perspective of National
University? National University is laser focused on non-traditional working and military students. So we are about 50,000 degree students a year. We have about a third of our programs are doctoral, a third are master's, a third are bachelor's. But AI actually cuts across all of that. And one of the things we're really thinking is about the idea of how we can make AI ubiquity like a reality. And part of it is it's becoming a new competence, like it is a core learning outcome for them to get, which is, it's really interesting that we've had all this debate about the adoption of AI in higher education, because I've ironically said, professors in higher education have used AI for decades. They were called grad students, right? And I'm not kidding. They would say, go get me a summary of all the research on X, Y, and they would get it. They would design me this, and they would design them a study, analyze the results. They would analyze the results, and they would tune it because sometimes it was a little off. It was basically the same process. We're actually now, this whole notion of interacting with an AI technology is something that we can think about within the academy, but we also need to make sure we're thinking about it across all of our disciplines. Mm-hmm. So one of the things we're really thinking about is the idea of creating an AI hub that is a center of the university that allows each of our disciplines to be able to interact with it and actually create a certification for each of the different discipline areas. So you'd have an AI for education, AI for healthcare, AI for law enforcement, and that certification can then be scaffolded in, can be laddered into any other credential. And the idea is we want to signal to employers that this person who's going to be entering law enforcement actually has an AI certification. This person who's going to be entering healthcare has an AI certification. And part of it is to make sure that AI is this, again, part of a larger conversation within the disciplines. And then secondly, we want to make sure that they experience AI in the learning process. They have to learn with AI. So we want to, like, it's physician healed ourself time. So we have to make sure we're using AI and supporting them as students and providing them resources to help learn more effectively, that we're using it to learn more effectively, because if they experience it as learners, they're more likely to be able to use it when they get out into the larger space. So we actually think it really is an ethical imperative. I always tell my liberal arts friends who are deeply skeptical about AI, and I share the concerns around some of it. It's like, for the love of all you hold dear, get involved in this conversation, because this is going to be everywhere. And if you're not adding your voice to this, we're not going to really be able to understand the good, bad, ugly, ethical imperatives all within this. So for us, it really is an all in on this, and we're trying to make sure we're helping lead the conversation. We're not trying to kind of throw bombs from the side, if you will. We're really trying to make sure we engage.
You're the second university president that's highlighted that PhD students were actually maybe achieving.
I was AI in my grad program. I was like my professors. It was so funny. It was like the whole idea of generating. We were doing generative AI for a long time.
With the cost of computing infrastructure, we might need to stick to that AI for some time. Anant, I want to go to you with sort of the same question, but as Mark was talking, and you guys have been the pioneer of thinking not only about degrees, but certificates and courses on all of these things. And so as we think about helping people pick up all of the skills that are required for this profound change, what do you think is important, and how can we help not only the students, but also the employers and some of the folks in the audience understand, what should they be looking for when they're trying to hire people with these skills?
Sure. Whenever I think about the future and how we should do things with teaching in the face of AI, I always go back to the past to see what might be a similar time frame when we had a similar technology that was going to change everything. And it reminded me of the mid-'80s and late '80s when computers began to become ubiquitous. And I'll take MIT's example that I've been teaching for 36 years. And in those days, in the '90s, every discipline was very insular. There was naval architecture, there was computer science where they taught about computers. And that's it, computer science was the only place you learned about computers. Civil, they all taught civil and how to build bridges and use calculators. But as computers became more and more ubiquitous, we all realized that the key thing that everybody had to learn was not how to code in Python or Fortran. The key thing was two words, what we call computational thinking. Mm-hmm. So computational thinking is the art of understanding how you can use computers in whatever you do. So really, it's a state of mind. And so if you're a chemist, the question then is computational thinking is about how can you use computers to do your job better, to do better chemistry, to build better chemical processes, and so on. And so that's what we begin getting into curricula. And today, the 30 years later at MIT, every department has ingrained computer science as a way of thinking as part of that department. That's computational thinking. Going forward, with that analogy, I believe it's two words going forward. I call it AI thinking. And frankly, everybody needs to learn that. AI is going to impact everything and everybody. You point to any person doing anything, AI will impact them. So everybody has to develop this art of computational thinking, much like we did with AI thinking, much like we did computational thinking. So what does that mean? It means that, let's say you're a chemist, or let's say you're a civil engineer. You need to understand what AI is and what can AI do for me? How do I use it effectively? What can it do? What can it not do? It's a broad understanding, just like with computational thinking, it's a broad understanding of AI. It's not about coding in Python and computational thinking. It's about broadly understanding what AI can do for you, and what are the limits, what are the constraints. And so one of the simplest ways to learn about AI thinking, there is no course on AI thinking yet, but the closest you can get to that is courses on prompt engineering. Prompt engineering is a way for people to use AI to help in various ways. How do you set boundaries? How do you set boundary conditions? How do you constrain AI? And we've launched a course on that on edX. It's a free course. You can learn about it in a couple of hours. It's pretty straightforward. And frankly, no matter who I meet, they said, what's the one thing I can do? Go do that course on computational thinking. It's about, on prompt engineering, which will help you develop this new concept of AI thinking. And that's what I believe everybody should be learning. You shouldn't be learning just like you didn't have to learn about Python. Don't worry about how to build machine learning models. Focus on understanding AI thinking. That's the key.
If I could quickly just jump on this,
please.
and it's such a great metaphor because this journey from novel to normal is one we've all lived before, and we've seen it with these big infrastructure technologies, whether it's electricity, whether it's computing, whether it's the web.
Yeah.
They go from novel to normal, where like no one has conferences about how electricity works anymore, unless you're in that discipline, whatever it is. Like it becomes like a normal, everyday part of our infrastructure. We're in this novel phase where we have to talk about it and unpack it and figure out and do all the use cases. It's going to be interesting to see how fast this gets to normal, where it becomes like an everyday thing we're doing. And of course, it's going to be accelerated because that's what's happening with our technology. But it is an interesting realization that our students are going to be living in a world where AI is normal. It's not going to be innovative. And so how do we get them to a place where they're comfortable with it?
I like both of those phrases. And so, Thais, I'll be coming to you as the person who's thinking about courseware and assessment as we think about some of these things. And so let me frame the question from some of the things I heard. One was, if I go to what Anant was sharing, is we need this AI thinking. And the way that I've been kind of talking to a lot of university leaders, we still need this foundational level of technical skills in AI thinking. And that's changing. We used to think about computational thinking. We used to think about whatever profound change. But ultimately, you're going to get hired for having the technical skill to do your profession, now powered with AI thinking of what a future chemist looks like or what a future philosopher or whatever it is. On top of that, we still need the critical thinking and the communications and the collaborations and all of the EQ. And then this thing is changing quite quickly of what is, who knows what that next phrase will be used at GSV in like 3 years? Is it AI thinking or something else? And so we need to be far more adaptable because it feels like it's coming faster and faster. And so, Thais, as the person who's sort of building the courseware and the assessments for how we are trying to stay on top of this, like, what does the future of assessment and courseware look like? How can we help faculty members stay on top of all this?
Are you ready for it? I have the answer. Now, so of course, I've been thinking a lot about it, and I'll give you some context of how and why I'm going to answer the way I'm going to answer. We just surveyed around 4,000 instructors in U.S. higher education. Only 14% of them said they are somewhat okay in understanding what to do with this technology in the classroom and for their students, right? Those are the subject matter experts in the pedagogy and assessment of the skills. If they don't know, who am I to know? I'm very comfortable saying that I don't know. But I do know that as publishers, as the creator of the assessment engines and so on and so forth, we cannot push that to the market. We have to wait for the market to tell us, Mark and Stacey, what is it that we are going to be assessing? Because right now we are working with obsolete tools, right? Trying to fit those things into it without really knowing what the thing actually is. And I do love the novelty to normal concept because it's absolutely true. We are not going to be talking about this in 3 years. We are going to be living it. Yep. And right now we're in this weird phase where we don't have the tools yet, but we will have it. But we need to wait for the employers, for the schools to tell us what is it they want to assess and how we want to assess it. And then they'll build it for you. I'm very confident of that, but I can't be the one telling the market how to assess stuff at this point in time.
And maybe building on that comment, Tracey or Mark, either one of you want to comment on, at your specific institutions, given this is happening in real time, how are you all, what's the dialogue like? How is this moving forward? How are you thinking about AI-powered tools, both for faculty or for students?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think picking up on what Thais said, so we want to incentivize faculty to experiment, to take risks, to try out the tools. And one of the fastest ways to do that is to give them a carrot, right? I often joke that in my job, I have no sticks. I only have carrots with the faculty, right? So one way you can do that is assessment is hard even without AI, right? So what if you teach them how to be more effective at assessing, create tools so that they can provide that formative feedback that accreditors are expecting us to give so frequently, but our faculty often tell us they don't have the time to do. And use that learning as a way for them to see the strengths and actually also the weaknesses of the technology as it exists. So rather than jumping to the conclusion that when their students use this, it's a substitute for the student's own thinking, instead they can see it's a supplement, right, for their thinking. So for us and what we're trying to do, and I'm here with members of my team, right, that's what we're gonna do, is we're gonna try to integrate it in and rely on experts and vendors to help us figure out how to do that effectively.
Yeah, just one more thing. So one thing that is being very clear to me, and Cengage is being very good at adhering to that rule, is that we don't see AI as replacement, we see it as augmentation, right? So whatever we do is giving an additional tool to augment and to aid, not to replace. Yeah.
Our faculty have embraced this, and we have a wonderful kind of rock star data science and AI faculty member who drives our doctoral program. In fact, one of her graduates is in the audience. Alexander, raise your hand, is an AI PhD, works now in the healthcare industry. But Jody Reeves has really been a clarion call for us at National University in helping us both advance the discipline of AI and data science more broadly, but also about how do we actually think about how we leverage leverage it internally. And the family of, she's presented to our board. She's been active with our broader faculty community. She's helped us think about our advising, but it's cascaded. And now we're seeing broad cross-cutting conversations around this, where we're really thinking about how are we going to use this to build assessments for learning? How are we going to use it to build scaffolds for assessment of prior learning in particular? How are we going to use this to think about how we, again, enable experiential learning opportunities for our students so they actually get some reps, right? And how they're going to use it, which is going to be a really big deal. But a big one I'm going to throw out for you is I actually think AI has the potential to possibly blow up the grade game. I think the world of higher ed and K-12 is in many ways held hostage to a 100-year-old grade game that was built for an industrial age. And that grade game is doing trauma to a lot of people. And students are focused more on playing the grade game than they are actually learning. It's all about trying to get to a certain level around the grade game. These tools, I think, give us the ability to create a scalable and replicable model to be able to judge whether somebody's mastering content. And we can probably do mastery learning at scale if we do this right. And so we're really intrigued about exploring that and figure out how do you develop that kind of model and leverage these kind of tools, because I think if we can get learning-centered education as opposed to grade-centered education, it can be transformative. So for us, it's everything from some of the basics for that learning, but I love how our faculty are adopting this and really challenging us to really think differently. And again, everything from our board to our advisory councils driving that larger conversation.
I love that. I think many people will be excited about potentially blowing up the grade game. But Mark, I'm going to use that as a pivot point to get into one of the things that I was talking about earlier, which is there is right now a lot of experimentation, but sometimes what people are highlighting is we don't know exactly what has been some of the ROI or impact of that. And so I generally have a rule in life of if you're on a panel with someone from MIT, you should ask them for some technical advice. And so, and we talked about this, I think, about a month ago. One of the things that was exciting in some of our conversations was that you were highlighting that you're already seeing some use cases that are having some impact. And so I'd love your perspective on, what are some of those specific use cases that you're most excited about when it comes to using AI in teaching and learning?
Sure. One of the, the last panel talked about online learning, and surprisingly, one important point didn't come through, which is when people are learning online, all the mouse clicks, all the data, all the events are tracked. And so we're getting all of this incredibly rich data if you're learning online. Pivoting to this panel, so we've, at edX and 2U, we've launched a whole suite of AI tools, and now we're getting some real data and learning from those tools. So for example, we've launched a suite of tools called Expert, X-P-E-R-T. And depending on the context, if you're inside a course, Expert Assistant will help you with the course. And it's Socratic. It won't answer a question immediately. It'll behave like a teacher, and it can be very annoying to a student, because when the student asks a question, the Expert will go back and ask the student a question. You can say, what's 2 plus 2? Expert will say, you want to add 2 plus 2. Do you know what 1 plus 1 is? And so there are ways to do it much more effectively. And similarly, we've launched these tools in a variety of areas. The one area we're gathering a lot of data already is in our boot camps, where the AI assistant is augmenting humans to answer students' questions. So one of our themes is that a learner needs to know when they are talking to AI versus when they're talking to a human. That's one of our ethical uses of AI. There's always going to be an expert button, and they'll know they're talking to AI versus we never try to commingle and fake them into believing they're talking to a real human when it's AI. So they have a choice of going to a human or AI. The first thing we observed, so we've had, and this is data from over 700,000 engagements. So it's like huge amount of data. So the first thing we observed was that the number of questions that the students are asking went up. Anybody want to guess how many fold? Tenfold. By what fold did the number of questions go up? Or do you think they went down when we gave them a choice of AI or humans? 400%. How many? 400%. The answer was 5 times. So what is 5 times? It's 400%. So you nailed it. You totally nailed it. And so, so the question is, so you must have read the blog post. So the beauty of that is the number of questions went up, And then we said, where are the questions going to? And it turned out 85% of the questions were going to AI. And so we dove in deeper to say, why are students so attracted to asking questions of AI? I'm sure there's a novelty aspect of it. And what we found is that, one, AI is available 7/24 anytime at an instant. So everybody wants instant gratification. I have a daughter and a son who are in their 20s, and I know that everybody's looking for this generation, boom, if I can't get it in like 10 seconds, it's not worth it. So AI can do that. With the human, you may have to wait while they think, and that takes too long sometimes. So with AI, even if it's garbage, it'll tell you the answer immediately. So that's important. The second thing is they can ask stupid questions again and again and again. Like when I ask my kid a question, if I ask him the second time, it says, Dad, you asked this already, like 3 minutes ago. But with AI, you can ask it any number of times, and it'll keep. It doesn't get mad at you, and so you can ask stupid questions, and it doesn't look at you saying, "Are you stupid or what?" No, none of that. So they love asking AI questions at any time. But then the harder questions and so on are answered by human beings. So we're getting some of this data showing that students are getting more engaged with that instant. It's almost like gamification. The key with gamification of learning is the instant feedback. And that is one of the pieces of data we are finding. And we also ask students to rate their interaction. And 97% of the learners, 97% of the interactions with AI got a thumbs up. So initially, we had a lot of pushback from faculty saying, what, me? And I don't want AI in my courses. And then we showed them the data. We said, look, 97% of the students are giving it a thumbs up. They said, maybe it's not half bad. So.
I love this because this conversation is a radically important one. At National University, we embrace this idea of whole human education. It's the idea that students are humans first. And so it's understanding how they're going to relate to AI. And what we hear from our folks who are dabbling with AI and working with AI, we're about launching our Navi bot right now, is students they feel a level of safety with AI where they're not going to be judged. And especially if they have, again, non-traditional working and military students, you often have folks with imposter syndrome. Where if they can ask a stupid question and not feel like they're going to be judged, it's a really big deal. And the other thing is the displacement effect, where those simple answers get answered by the AI, and the deeper question, we always say, how do you use technology to make human moments precious? Right, so we have more time to do the deeper questions. I'd rather have our advisors focused on helping people answer questions about why are you in this discipline? Why do you care about going in this direction, as opposed to how do I schedule this next course? Right, so part of us is that displacement value we're going to get out of AI is going to be deeply important for us to really talk about, and then really think about how that's going to play out. The one thing I'll add around this, though, is there's a real danger, and one of the dangers is, and we said this in the early days of the web, was when something's in print, students thought if it's in print, it's true.
Right.
And if it was on the web, the research showed they thought it was truer if it got up on the World Wide Web. And here's the problem now. Now it's like if it's in print, it's true. If it's on the internet, it's true. Or if it comes from AI, they think it comes from God. They really they trust it at a level they shouldn't trust it. So it's part of us is making sure they understand the underlying technology and how it's going to play out.
I'm very happy you said that, because what keeps me up at night, and I have my ET right here, and I look at them, is that it's accuracy. Right?
I think that explains why some of what we're seeing in our political systems and what people believe has changed so much.
Exactly. And so accuracy is something that it's not acceptable to release a product in education that's not accurate, right? At least I don't think it is acceptable. And so what our experience with it has been that the narrower you get, the better it is, right? And so when we are talking about bots and that kind of interaction, we've been hearing a lot of, yesterday I was talking to the Camigo team, and it's really a lot of the problem they're facing with students not knowing what to ask or to ask quality questions because it's too broad. And so we've been working, and because of the accuracy, led us into the space of the narrow model and narrow content grounding, and that actually increases engagement because it's just about this one topic, and it's specific to that assessment item and nothing else. So there's no, what is that you want to know about the world, right? You don't wonder. You just really focus on the work you're doing, and no judgment, patience, all of it, it helps.
Thais, one follow-up that I wanted to ask you in particular, and then also ask the others, is we've seen it not only in the education industry, but broadly in the media industry and other places where there's real concerns over some of the use cases we're even talking about on where are they learning, and is that learning coming at the odds of IP that are either from the universities, from the faculty members, and others. And so how have you wrestled with this, kind of being able to, continue to advance things that are really exciting on some of the things that have been talked about, while managing the kind of risks and ethics and frankly, even just the IP protection?
So the two things we're talking about are not conflicting. The narrow experience with a chatbot, it's constrained and grounded to one particular narrative, is not conflicting with the IP protection. Actually, it's one thing that protects the IP because it doesn't go into any large model. It's very constrained to the thing you're building. At Cengage, we're being very careful with this. We are protecting our content because that's what we do, right? So we are not licensing, we are not sharing. We are trying really hard to educate the faculty that work with us to not do this, to do the same, to not share, to not upload, so on and so forth. And so for now, that is what we're doing, very intentionally, not leveraging the content in an open, on a large model, anything like that. It is, of course, a problem that we're all going to face. There are litigation in place, and we need to wait until regulation comes into place. Cengage is a global company. We already have things in place for Europe, and you're following this. But the United States has been very loose on the language on this. So for now, what we are doing is really locking our content inside guardrails. And we don't foresee a future where we are going to open that up to the world to take it. It's ours, and we are protecting it, leveraging it.
Right now, a lot of the APIs from the vendors, you have to be extremely careful. When we built a plugin for ChatGPT plugins, one of the earliest to build a edX plugin. And for the plugin, it turns out that the agreement from OpenAI was actually, a lawyer said, yeah, this looks good, done. But some of the engineers went and looked very carefully at the agreement, and it turned out there were real loopholes where what the agreement said is that any data, any IP that you send us, your data will not be used to train the large language models. That's great. Victory, no? No. But then the small print said, oh, but any responses that we generate as a result of the data you shared with us can be used to train our models.
Right. They own the derivatives. Exactly.
They own the derivatives. But that is BS. And so we've been working with OpenAI to say, look, either you make that little print bold and make it very clear to people that you are using the derivatives, or don't do it, which is even better. Yeah.
And the derivatives, by the way, are more predictive. They're more valuable than the actual core content.
So we actually have to work in these early days, we actually have to work with all the vendors to make sure that they are doing the right things. The good news is that when you use their enterprise APIs, not for the plugin, but for the enterprise APIs, they promise that they won't use the data for their derivatives or for their initial data that you send. So,
Tracey, let me comment on that, but maybe let me just add a little bit of a additional part to the question is, as you think about Vanderbilt and the fact that you're a R1 university and a giant research enterprise too, how are you thinking about balancing not only some of these IP risks, but also on the research side of things? And what Anant shared was great from the enterprise standpoint, but you also have this huge faculty and student body that are also using the free versions of these tools. And so in this world of a playground where all this exists, how do you think about managing the risks and ethics of all this stuff?
Yeah, so I love you called it a playground, right? So I think that's what you think of it as, right? So you make it a playground that has all of the adventure, the fun, the excitement, and you make the fence so it's not as visible to the children at play, right? So what we did at Vanderbilt, first of all, I think coming back to the ethics question, this is what higher education does, right? This is what we do. We engage with these questions, we debate them, we have experts in them. And so we came out very quickly with a cross-university trans-substantive policy on the use of AI in research and teaching and learning that made clear that fundamentally you are the author of your work. And if you use AI to assist you, you're responsible for whatever implications that brings to bear. So if the AI is bringing in someone else's content, you cannot represent that as your own. If you do, that's not just plagiarism, it's a violation of their IP rights. So I think just reinforcing your ethical obligations when you use a powerful tool, I don't know what the next powerful tool is going to be. But I think to your point too, so of course we're very worried at Vanderbilt about our IP, the IP of our faculty, the contracts we have with entities ranging from the Department of Defense, right, to industry. So what we stood up at Vanderbilt is a tool we call Amplify, which is a platform available to people within Vanderbilt to use the different generative AI tools in a safe, secure environment, right? We wanted to encourage people to use our version rather than the version out in the world. So we're not charging fees right now. Fortunately, it turns out most people are not, dumping huge amounts of data in. Even our highest level users, people who are using massive data sets, typically people in data science, they cost us maybe $2 a month, right? So it's not a lot. And we've had so much uptake, it's been really hard to keep up with it. I think that is the future. I think that we're all going to have to build that in order to ensure we can protect our AI. But it also is a way for us to underscore and see, because then we get the data. Right, and we can get a sense of how our users are using it and plan accordingly.
Yeah, it's actually exactly what we did at Cengage. We have an instance of enterprise solution inside the company that employees can use it for free and experiment with it and get familiar with it. And it creates a lot of innovation and efficiencies and so on and so forth, and removes this mythic idea of the technology that is magic, right? That is going to solve all the problems of the world today. And so, with that, they are allowed to leverage our IP inside the company without being concerned that it's going to be used somewhere else.
Interesting. I want to pivot to our last topic. And when I started, I mentioned, from a lot of conversations, one of the biggest challenges is this just comes down to change management and a people problem more so than a tech problem. And Thijs, let me maybe start with you, because you were commenting on this in some of our discussions, where how are you actually, there's some people who are worried about some of these risks that we've mentioned. There's some people who are worried about the fact that maybe, it'll change their jobs, and maybe there won't be, the same jobs in the future. And so as you think about actually driving kind of the adoption of some of the things that you mentioned, how are you doing that effectively? How are you thinking about scaling that so more people are excited and using these things responsibly?
Yeah, so Cengage is doing a very good job at educating the population of the company and our faculty that work with us. What I mean by that is repeating all the time that our goal is augmentation, not replacement. Right, and making sure that they understand that it's a tool and not they're going to take their jobs. To be really honest, in the corporate world, so many things are threatening your job, right? Offshoring, efficiencies, all those things. And so this is just one more thing that we need to manage and make sure people understand that they need to get on the program somehow, right? They'll have to learn how to use that tool. If they do learn how to use that tool, is a tool that will help them and make them more efficient and give them superpowers, like my boss likes to say, and not be afraid of it. And continuously say that all the time, over and over again.
Anybody else want to add on?
Yeah.
Sure. Go ahead. The data helps. And the example I shared earlier where the number of questions students asked went up 400%, and 85% of the questions went to AI. That example helps people understand that big technological changes like these don't remove people, but they add value. In other words, the number of people that are the humans who are helping the students stays the same. They're still getting the same number of questions. But the number of questions skyrocketed, and AI is handling a lot of those questions. So what it does is that AI augments the humans and creates a much better experience for the learners. And so oftentimes companies will say, okay, in our support function or in our help desk, we're going to add AI and reduce the headcount. And often what happens is that they don't end up reducing headcount. It's just that they do a much better job of customer service because AI can answer those questions much sooner. And AI can augment the humans and give them superpowers. They can turn the existing support people into super support people, and ending up in much, much better customer service. So that's the kind of data we have to share with people to show that these are tools that will help people simply become much better.
I think I could not agree more. And I think, Tracey, you nailed it when you said this is the role of education. Yeah. This is the role of higher education in particular. And I don't think we do anybody any favors by acting as though it's going to be okay. Like, the truth is, people will be, our authenticity really matters. And people are going to use AI for exploitative purposes, and then others are going to use AI in a way that is about making opportunity more expansive, like more people have opportunity. And our challenge to our colleagues in the world of education has got to be, get in the game. We have to be in this conversation because we want to be a part of creating a future where these tools and technologies and the policies and practices around them create opportunity for people. It doesn't actually make exploitation more likely, and there is that likelihood. So our imperative has got to be around how we can create the playbooks for a better life as opposed to something that could be more damaging.
Yeah, I think I would just end by saying I think it's our job, if you're in higher ed or if you're supporting higher ed, and I assume you are since you're here, to point out that to fulfill our mission of education, discovery, social impact, universities do have to be stable, but we cannot stand still, right? And so this is just one more example where we need to engage while being true to our roots at the same time.
Perfect. Well, we're out of time. Thank you all for attending, and thank everyone on the panel. Thank you.